So guys, today I want to talk about two things that are extremely important. One, we're going to talk a little bit about the history between the church and political communities. And you might find this part a little bit informative, and it requires you to pay some attention. It's a little bit more history, but that's okay. I think it helps us to know where we are. The second part is important, I think, which is more relevant to a lot of the events that's happening now these days in our country, in our nation. It talks a little bit about what are the different Christian views to politics as we go on today. You guys have to understand that there is a diverse approaches to politics, and it's important for us as I'm talking today. I know a lot of people like us to tell them what to do, okay? But today what I would like to do is give you some of the history, also give you some of the ways that people think, and I want you to help think through them. And hopefully thinking through these tools will help you to come with the right decisions, okay? So first of all, what is a political community? When we talk about a political community, it's very important for us to understand that political community is not tribes and is not a family. A political community is a community that is protected by organized violence. So when we talk about political community, I'm talking about a community that shares a land, language, history, blood, and they are protecting themselves by organized violence. And this organized violence is in a form of a military, a form of a police force, and this is what we call a political community, okay? So America is a political community, Egypt is a political community, that's how it works, okay? Every political community, they share some sort of traditions, some sort of rituals, okay? And for example, if you guys would go back 50 years, 20 years, 50, not 20 years, 50, 100 years, if you go to different political communities around the world, you will see people actually dressed differently, eating differently. Like, for example, China, Egypt is very big on bread. China is very big on rice. America is very big on French fries. So everybody has a different type of food. Everybody has a different type of things you do. So there's a certain sense of ritual that everybody shares. Even the way that people dress, like everybody, the jeans and shirts and all these things, they're all relatively Western culture, right? But other culture used to dress differently. But now, because of the globalization, we're all kind of merging to be doing the same thing. Even surprising enough, even in Egypt, recently they're all proposing the same way we're doing in America, you know? So this is also changing, okay? And they're celebrating Halloween. I was like, we're trying to avoid Halloween here, but they're celebrating Halloween in Egypt. So it's a little crazy how the globalization changing everything, but every culture had its own political identity. When we look at the early church, okay, in the time of Greco-Roman world, okay, you cannot separate religion from politics. It doesn't work. Even scientists cannot separate them. Actually, to be part of a political community meant that you're part of a religious community. It meant that you had to practice certain things that everybody else practice. Okay, and when we have a political community, for example, any political community like America, we have people who sacrificed for this political community. Like, for example, the founding fathers. And our obligation as citizens is to remember them and think of them, because that's what unifies us, okay? Now, for Christian, to join a political community in the early time, in the ancient world, in the time of Jesus, was extremely difficult. Why? Because every political community had rituals. And these rituals included sacrificing to the emperor, sacrificing to the idols, especially in the military. So a lot of Christians tried to avoid the war, tried to avoid the military, tried to avoid authoritative position, because they would have to actually offer to the idols. Okay? And by the way, I want to tell you guys something. In Christian history, there has been 4 Roman emperors who have been extremely aggressive against Christian. 3 before Constantine, 1 after Constantine. 2 of the 3 before Constantine, when they persecuted Christians, they targeted the rich and the people who have money and people who have authority. So Christians were trying to stay away from the political sphere because of the persecution, not because they were against being part of political the political environment. Okay, so they wanted to be good citizens, but they can't because of they join the military, join these things, they have to pay a price. Okay, so let's look, for example, at just a random political, not very random, but a specific political community in the ancient world, which is Rome. What does it mean to be a Roman citizen? What does it mean to be citizen in that ancient time? For you to be a Roman citizen, it meant three things. One, you need to have a new name that is Roman. Two, you needed to actually practice Roman rituals. Okay, and number three, you needed to be one of the elites of the empire. So these are three things I define you as Roman. Okay, so Christians had a lot of issues on being identified as Roman because of the Roman ritual. Okay, guys, I want to just step back 1 second. Look, Christianity was unusual because of one thing. There is no religion. I want you to understand this part. There is no religion in the time of Christianity that was separated from a political party. Judaism was a political community. Jews were a political community and still are political community. Even Islam, when they started, they were a political community. And until now, to a relative extent, there is a little bit of a strong political essence to the religion. Christianity, however, was not tied to a land, was not tied to a political community. So it looked at as a very suspicious thing. What is this? We've never seen anything like that, where people just go preach from country to country and they form a community and they just have a communication together. This was just unusual, unheard of. So people used to look at Christians as they are traitors, we don't trust them. And usually in our era right now in America, we appreciate innovation. Innovation is good. Something new is good. In the ancient world, something new was actually bad. Okay? So actually you wanted something that is old. And when you have something old, it meant that it was good. So Jews, for example, were justified to remain the way they are just because they were ancient. They were more ancient than the Romans and the Greek. Same thing, when the Romans came, they had to ask themselves a question. Are we Greek, because the Greek were before the Romans, or are we barbarian? Because Greek and barbarian fought together and the Roman came out. There was a lot of important questions that people were asking. So for us to have, for Christian at that time, it was extremely important for them to understand, to defend themselves. They're telling people, look, we are actually very old. And I'll give you some quotes. Tertullian said, Christians are the heirs to the Jewish heritage. You say we're new, we're suspicious, but we're not. Clement of Alexandria said, Christians are the original human. Origen said, Christian is the ethnicity that all should join. You guys understand the argument here? The argument here, people are telling them, you're new, we don't know who you are, you're suspicious, what are you up to? And then they're saying, no, wait a second. We are actually the heirs of the Jewish heritage. We're actually the original human. What does that tell you? That in Christianity, there is no difference in ethnicity. There's no difference in gender. Everybody is treated equally. And you actually will see this in Galatians 3:28. It said, for as many as you were baptized in Christ have put on Christ. There is neither a Jew or Greek. There is neither slave nor free. There is neither male or female, for you are all one in Christ Jesus. And this has been the philosophy of the church from the beginning. And by the way, the understanding of slavery in the early church was much different than today. It was never tied to a race, and it was never tied to the same systems we have today. I'm just explaining to you as we go through. I'm going to go on a tangent and come back. In the old days, the main person who was in charge of everything was the leader of the household. And the head of the household was the one that everybody respected. And actually, the difference between a slave and a son in the Roman laws, that a father could beat a slave in public, but he could not beat his son in public. Okay? But the son can be beaten at home. Okay? So it's a different structure. It's a different completely mindset than we have today. Just want to put this out there. Okay? So, but in Christianity, we're talking about Christianity was very suspicious. People said, look, this is not normal. Every country had a religious identity. Those Christians are crazy. They have no country that they belong to, and they're all over the place. Doesn't make sense to us. Okay? So Christians were looked at very suspiciously, and they became overall very defensive. They're trying to explain to people what they're doing, but also they became very distant from the political positions, because any political positions meant that they have to offer to the idols, and they do not want to do that. Okay. Now, I'm sorry I give you a lot of information, which is okay, because things will get easier after this. Now, there is a huge shift that happened in the relationship between church and politics in the time of Constantine. What happened in the time of Constantine? Constantine came and said, look, Christianity will be legal. And anybody who wants to be Christian, they should be Christian. Now, this was an extremely significant. You guys know why? Constantine did something that probably not a lot of you guys know about. He actually created something called the bishop courts. The bishop courts. Basically, bishops were allowed to be judges, and their judgment would override a local judge. So if two people are fighting over heritage, they're not going to go to the court. They can go to a bishop, and the civil magistrate has to follow what the bishop says. So you went from a case where there was no interaction between religion and politics, and now you have an extreme intermingling between religion and politics. Now there's another problem. What is the problem is that before Constantine, people used to look at politics in a different way. They said, look, God in the Old Testament, he was involved in war, he was leading a political community, and the main reason he wanted to show them that God can give them all the worldly blessing they want. But in the New Testament, God, can you just mute this?
I'm sorry.
Yeah, just mute yourself. It's okay. So in the New Testament, they said, well, God is going to give us, God doesn't want to lead us as a political community. He's going to lead us. He wants us to show us the kingdom. Okay, so this was the view up to Constantine. What happened after Constantine was confusing. Why? Because now all of a sudden, the first battle that Constantine went through was the Milvian Bridge. What happened in the Milvian Bridge? He saw a cross in heaven, and he heard a voice and told him, with this you will be victorious. So now Constantine is not any normal emperor. He's one who's supported from heaven. Is that clear? So now what's happening is people said, look, that's not only God wants us to give us heavenly blessing in the New Testament, he also wants to give us earthly blessings. And Constantine is this kingdom of God on earth. And you have seen many people writing so many beautiful things about Constantine will drive you crazy. Sometimes when you read it, you're like, it's a little bit of exaggeration there, okay? I'm not going to go through it. He's a good man. He's a saint. But a little of because, now people look at him as the emperor that's fulfilling the heavenly and the earthly blessings, which is very extreme, okay? Now, something happened. Now we went through shifts, and I was just sorry you guys to organize. Before, they were not involved in politics, because if we get involved in politics, they're going to make us worship idols. Now Constantine came, we're very involved in politics. And Constantine, we have a holy kingdom, we have a Christian kingdom, and everything is holy. Now, another small shift happened. This is the last shift I'm going to talk about. There was a Christian king, his name is Theodosius. King Theodosius did something crazy. He went to Thessalonica, and he killed 7,000 innocent people. Pagans, by the way, not Christians. So people were extreme. Let's show you how Christians behaved from the beginning. People were extremely upset. St. Ambrose, the Bishop of Milan, would not allow Emperor himself, would not allow him to enter the church for 6 months. He was standing with people who are repenting before he takes communion. After this event, people started to go back and say, you know what, there is a problem. Looking at worldly emperors as the fulfillment of the Christian kingdom is wrong. Because emperors can make mistakes, and they can kill people unjustly, and they cannot fulfill the promises of God. So now they started Augustine was the first one to start hinting the idea of separation between state and religion. Okay, now why am I telling you this history? One, because it's important for you to know when you're reading Christian history, which era you are in to understand why the politics are aligning this way. So if I'm in the era pre-Constantine, I know that this is history where Christians are trying to avoid worshiping idols. And that's why they're doing this. Okay. If I'm in the era post-Constantine, immediately I'm in the era where everybody's praising Constantine and life looks good and everybody thinks that, you know, we're fulfilling the political desire of God on earth. Okay. Now, if I'm in the era post Theodosius, which is few years after Constantine, it means I'm in the era where we're finally going back to a separation between state and religion. Is that clear? Do you guys have any questions? I want to make a stop here before I go on so we can continue. I see Nardine has a question.
Nardine has a question.
Yeah. So you talked about the bishop's court and how it can rule, it can like basically be higher than a normal judge. So did the bishops have to follow still like the law of the land and whatever the emperor kind of has out, or can they override that?
So that's actually a very good question. Initially, so be careful what I'm going to say. Initially, in the time of Constantine, the very, very beginning, the Roman had an extremely strong law system, but the bishop could override it. Okay, initially, but that did not last for a long time. Okay, because you can imagine, imagine for example, if you go to church late and you take communion, all right, and somebody takes you to court and then you have to pay a fine, right? Now, what happened is people will violate Christian rules or Christian guideline, which is designed for worship, but they could get easily punished for it in a civil court. You see the difference? You understand? Yeah. So this was actually, by the way, in the West, just to give you guys an example, in the West, right after the Protestant Reformation, it was actually a capital offense to get rebaptized. You guys know that? So right after the Protestant Reformation, that's why you have the Anabaptist, which is a really big movement, which was the idea of, our first baptism doesn't count. We're just washing. That's what their argument was, because it was actually a capital offense. So that there was a lot of mingling, there was a lot of interaction between religion and politics at that time. Okay?
But
so, yeah.
What was exactly the point of having a bishop's court? Was it to criminalize certain things that were being broken in the church, or was it to just rule over any kind of civil dispute?
Rule over any kind of, so you can imagine Constantine, he was victorious, he saw the cross in heaven, the man sees Christianity is the true religion, and he goes back and he says, look, those bishops are very holy, those bishops are men of God, I'm going to make them, their judgment must be final. Now, I don't want to go too much, the bishop court had a lot of benefits, by the way, because any poor person can go to the bishop and present their case. When you go to a criminal system, like for example, here in America, even though we have a lot of good laws, good just laws, you still need a lot of resources, right? Attorneys are very expensive, you know? So there's always pros and cons, but eventually they found it's not the ideal way to go. Okay, I don't want to go a lot through the bishop courts, but I just want to explain to you also it has its own pros and cons, okay? Anybody else has another question before we go? Give you guys 30 more seconds just to make sure you guys are okay. Okay, so now we finished the history of politics and all. Now I'm going to give you what I'm going to give you right now. If you didn't hear anything I said, that's okay. I don't care. Now what I'm going to tell you is important, okay? Now, there are 3 different views in which Christians view politics. 3 different views in which Christians view politics. The first one, okay, it's called, let me just get the right name so I have it here. It's called political realism. What is political realism? Political realism is basically very simple. It's saying that our world is fallen. It's a world full of sin. And we have to accept that we cannot achieve all the moral ideals as a political community, not as a person, as a political community. So this idea says, look, we must commit violence to achieve a greater good. We must achieve something, quote unquote, we must do something, quote unquote, not good to achieve justice. Okay, is that clear? And this actually this political view actually comes also from Augustine. Augustine said, the political community is born out of our fallen world. Christians are called to bring justice. They are called to live in the work of justice with God's love, and will find our temporal citizenship demand of us that is in conflict with the heavenly citizenship. Okay, so there is a little bit of a problem here. The problem is that, well, we as a political community, we want privilege, we want to people protected, we want to have certain boundaries, all these things, but these things come at a cost. I'll give you guys an example. And look, if you agree or disagree with me, that's okay. I'm just giving you an example, just a simple thing to keep it in mind. One of the things, for example, that our United Nation, our nation is very good at is using something called predator drones. You guys know what predator drones are? Okay. So basically, instead of having a strong military everywhere and bases everywhere, what they have is they have drones flying all over the world. And they have certain countries where they will identify if there are tourists in these countries, like Afghanistan, Yemen, all these places, okay? And what happens is, once they identify a target, these, by the way, these are unmanned drones, unmanned aircrafts, okay? So they identify a target, boom, they kill him. All right? We all feel this is good, right? It's protecting us. It's killing the terror. I don't want to say all. Some people feel this is good. It's killing the terrorists, you know? It's avoiding us to go to war. But also, people in these countries, they constantly live under terror because many of them die all the time. They're walking in the streets and all of a sudden there's a missile that comes and kills random people. You guys understand? So people are going to say, well, and this is exactly, you know, what you say why terrorists are bad is because they randomly kill people and they make people live in fear. Well, drones do the same exact thing to people. They make them live in fear, and they make them not able to know like where the enemy is. Can you imagine living in Yemen or Afghanistan and you're walking anywhere and boom, just something randomly going to kill you? And people say, look, this is an evil, I'm just giving you different views. Again, today I'm told you I'm going to give you some tools. That's it, you know? So this is something that people like to use and say, look, we are a political community and we will have to do some sort of violent thing, evil thing, but our main goal is to achieve justice. So what we will do something in the name of justice. It might not be the intention of the act is justice, but the act itself might be violent. Is that clear or not clear? This is just one Christian perspective, okay? And by the way, look, let me tell you guys something. We as Coptic Orthodox, we have no problem people joining the army. A lot of our great saints were from the army, St. George, St. Philip, Marcorius. We have no problem joining the army. This is part of our national, and there was a centurion who wanted to talk to Jesus and asked him for an advice, and Jesus gave him an advice. So we as Christians are not against the idea of joining armies. But the thing is about this is a worldview that people see. Is that, look, if you want me to deal with politics, I'm going to deal with it in a practical sense. There are sins in the world, people are fallen. There is no way we're going to have a completely ideal, holy system in the world. So look, all what we could do is just have some sort of just action. I'll give you guys another example, just so you guys are aware. One example, when we had the pandemic, the COVID-19, we're still having the pandemic, but earlier on in the pandemic, okay, what happened? We were short on masks, okay? But the whole world was short on masks. So our president said, look, 3M, this is the company that makes masks. He said, look, you have to give priority to the US. It was not based on who in the world needs it, but it was based on we are America and you work here and you have to provide for us. Whether you like it or not, I'm not disagreeing. I'm just telling you that this political realism is, look, let's look practically at the world and let's make just decision as best as possible. Is that clear? Okay, this is one Christian view that people have. There's another extreme Christian view that people have. Yes, I see your hands.
I just have a quick question. So political realism can be a stance Christians hold, but it's not just defined to the Christian community.
Yes, right.
Take a political philosophy class, you can speak about political realism outside of maybe the Christian.
Absolutely.
That's like a general term.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. Yeah, absolutely. The main reason I'm using this term is because I'm going to contrast it with other two Christian approaches that are predominantly Christians. But
okay,
I appreciate your comment. Thank you, Daniel.
No, thank you. I appreciate that.
Yeah, yes, Nerdina.
So with political realism, is it mostly who has the power who makes the decision, or um, like in the example of Trump, for example, is it just to say that he has more power because this is like your headquarters is here and I have the power, so you have to give me more? Or is it just based on kind of the factors, like this, the facts, as like, oh, we have more cases and that's what it is? Is it more practical? Is it more power based?
It is definitely more power. So the way that they define justice across nation is justice is achieved by the balance of powers. So the whatever, as like, how are you gonna look? This approach is practical. So they have to look at the world practically, right? So the practical outcome of a world that believes in political realism is the justice you can achieve is the balance of the power that you have. Is that clear? You understand what I'm trying to say? So, and this is actually what happens usually practically. Whatever the US wants with their allies and the Russian, and there's always a balance. Okay, I don't want to get too much political, but there we go. Okay, now the other view that I think it might be attractive to a lot of Christians, which is the passive approach. And the passive approach, this is predominantly Christian approach. There are some people like Gandhi and other people who follow the same way, but the idea is they will use absolutely no violence whatsoever. So if you're, for example, if you are at home and somebody comes and attacks your wife or your children, you will do no violence. They believe in absolutely no violence no matter what. And they believe